Since the Carney Liberals were returned to office, organizers of a push for a referendum on the question of secession tell CBC News they've seen a surge in interest. Citizens who want a separate Alberta are now calling for it outside the legislature.
If you enjoy these videos, please subscribe. Well, folks, there's a real shift happening in Alberta. What used to be considered fringe talk is now mainstream. Over half of Albertans say the independence movement should be taken seriously. People are frustrated with Ottawa and tired of being ignored, especially when Alberta contributes so much to this country. From the oil patch to the foothills, more and more Albertans are asking, why not go our own way? It's no longer just talk. It's showing up in polls, rallies, and it's got real political momentum behind it. Something big is brewing in the West.
By the way, there is something going on in Canada that people here in the States don't really know about. There is a move by a couple of provinces, primarily Alberta in the West, which has a lot of oil. It's a very rich province. Right. The Premier has suggested that they're not getting anything from the federal government. They're giving billions. At one point, the Premier is a woman. She said, Premier Smith said that they've given $1 trillion worth of mineral wealth to Ottawa, to the central government, and have received practically nothing in return. 33% of Albertans want to secede from Canada. Yep. And remember that Quebec tried to do that a couple of decades ago. It actually went to the Canadian Supreme Court in 1998, and they outlined a process by which you can secede. It's the only Commonwealth nation that allows a nonviolent process for secession. So I think Donald Trump and this 51st state thing is playing into that, what's going on in Canada. It
Maybe
seems
you could chip
totally
off
out
a
of the
piece
ballpark.
at a time and do business with the very oil-rich section of Canada.
Now, here's where things get really interesting. Donald Trump has hinted that he would recognize an independent Alberta if it chose to separate. That could mean direct U.S. deals on energy, security, and trade, bypassing Ottawa entirely. Alberta has what America wants: oil, gas, and a similar culture. Some even talk about forming a U.S.-Alberta association. If that ever happened, it could reshape the political map of North America in a huge way.
But one of the things, even in the more moderate folks that I've encountered from Central and Eastern Canada, their lack of understanding of the basic roles and responsibilities of governments and who does and pays for what is remarkable. People come after me on Twitter and say, well, how are you going to pay for your health care then? Well, we already pay for our health care, and we net pay at least $20 billion a year to Ottawa that we don't get back. So we'll actually have $20 billion laying around in our pocket to maybe spend a little more on health care. Thank you very much. People think that the Crown land in Alberta means federal Crown. It doesn't. The only federal land in Alberta is 4 national parks, 4 military bases, and a number of First Nations reserves under the treaties. And when you combine that all together, the First Nations reserves only 1.31% of the land base, and then the federal component is 20. Some people think that the federal government owns the oil and gas here, all owned by the province, the water. The only thing the federal government really has a responsibility for in Alberta is like running a passport office, and they can't even do that. So it's remarkable to me, the lack of understanding. Like Nova Scotia has, and I'm not sure on the exact numbers, but I believe it's around $12 billion is their budget. Almost $4 billion of that comes from Alberta. What's going to happen to Nova Scotia when we leave? Right? And if we leave, where Ontario's now going to have to pay that money. And the fellow from the Toronto Star won't be so smug at that point. The reality is that Alberta is a tremendous asset to Canada. We fund so much of Canada's activities. We ask so little, and instead we've just been harassed.
Could it actually happen? Alberta calling it quits with Canada after a 120-year-long marriage? Most Albertans apparently think so.
We're looking at a majority of people who are right now looking at Alberta separation as an issue that is real. It's certainly different from what we see in other parts of the country where the numbers are lower. We don't see any other part of of Canada, where we reach such a high number of people who say this is a real possibility.
Mario Canseco asked 1,200 Canadians who had just voted to think about the effect a Liberal win could have in provinces where most people vote Conservative, Alberta in particular. The pollster found 65% of Canadians don't want Alberta to leave. What's changed? Well, in recent months, Trump's talk of a 51st state has normalized a new challenge to Confederation. And then domestically, those who've been keeping an eye on this stuff for decades have been warning that the idea of Alberta separating is not feeling as fringy as it used to. Since the Carney Liberals were returned to office, organizers of a push for a referendum on the question of secession tell CBC News they've seen a surge in interest. Citizens who want a separate Alberta are now calling for it outside the legislature.
Something that most people in Eastern Canada fail to realize is that Alberta sends over $20 billion a year to other provinces through equalization. Most of that money goes to Quebec and the Maritimes, including Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and so on. Yet they often vote against Alberta's interest and block its energy projects. If Alberta kept that money, it could fund its own programs even better, including schools, hospitals, and infrastructure. Culturally, Alberta's just a different world, built by ranchers, oilmen, entrepreneurs, and cowboys. It's a place that values hard work, risk-taking, and independence. That's a sharp contrast to Laurentian Canada's top-down, tax-heavy model, where government controls everything. Maybe it's time we stop pretending this situation is working for everyone.
An observer might say, when they look at the size of the country, second largest country in the world by landmass, and they look at the cultural diversity and the economic diversity, is there sufficient homogeneity? Do we have enough in common to really be a viable country? I don't know. I've observed the cultural variation from east to west. I've observed the cultural variation from, the Vancouver coastline to Alberta, and maybe he's right on that. But what I do know for certain, having studied this very carefully, is that there's little opportunity for my kids and grandkids in a future Canada with the direction that the voters in Eastern Canada have continually decide for the future of this country. Printing money over restrictions, governments supposedly going to keep people safe, which just means take away their freedoms. And then I compare it to what opportunities and the prosperity and the potential for achievement that exists if Alberta were to become independent. It's just the conclusion's obvious.
All right, thanks for watching. Thank you for subscribing. Special thanks to those of you who have donated to this project. It is much appreciated, and it helps me continue making videos. See you on the next one. Peace.